The night was alive with music spilling over the ocean breeze, as if Malibu had decided to host the most extravagant symphony. Strings of golden light draped across the cliffside resort, catching in the wind like glowing ribbons. The sea below thrashed against jagged rocks, and every crash of water blended into the rhythm of bass from the DJ's booth perched at the heart of the Vasquez estate. This was no ordinary party. It was the celebration only a governor's son could host, a half-political spectacle and a half-hedonistic parade. Politicians rubbed shoulders with celebrities. Influencers live-streamed every sip of champagne. Heirs of tech empires whispered stock secrets over plates of oysters. At the bar, surrounded by velvet ropes and half-empty whiskey bottles, Dave Vasquez leaned casually against the polished wood, as if the whole world belonged to him. 25, born with a smile that could buy forgiveness and destroy defenses. Dave carried his privilege like a perfectly tailored suit. His half-buttoned white polo, the Rolex glinting beneath the lights, the slow swirl of amber liquor in his glass, made him seem untouchable. Yet his smirk held something else tonight, something restless. Another one? The bartender asked, pausing mid-pour. Dave's eyes narrowed, then softened with the charm drilled into him since boyhood. Make it stronger this time. Tonight I don't feel like being soft. The glass clinked down in front of him. He raised it, scanning the crowd like a king might survey his kingdom. Perfect smiles, designer dresses, and hollow laughter were the same every weekend. A carousel of beautiful faces, none of them lasting beyond the sunrise. And then he saw her. At first she blended into the shadows near the terrace doors, a figure too quiet for the cacophony. No sequins, no plunging neckline, just a simple white dress that brushed the knees loose enough to dance in, modest enough to be ignored. Her hair was pinned back in a way that spoke of effortlessness, not vanity. Her skin glowed under the lantern light, but it wasn't her beauty that stopped Dave's breath. It was the stillness. She didn't fidget with her phone or scan the room for approval. She stood as if she were entirely at the wrong party. And maybe that was why Dave couldn't look away. "Who's the girl?" he muttered half to himself. Ken, his oldest friend, clapped him on the back. "Which one? The model in the red dress?" "No." Dave tilted his glass toward the terrace. "Her. The quiet one." Ken squinted, then laughed. "She doesn't belong here, man. Look at her holding onto that bag like she's about to bolt, probably someone's +1 from downtown. Tourists don't last in this crowd." "Not a tourist," Dave said firmly, as if naming a truth he couldn't explain. "She's different." Ken smirked. "Careful. Different usually means dangerous." But Dave was already moving slow and deliberate, each step winding the tension tighter. He cut through clusters of chattering elites, ignoring the greetings, the flirtatious hands tugging at his sleeve. His eyes never left the girl. When she noticed him coming, she froze. He almost smiled at how her shoulders squared, as if bracing for impact. Most women at these parties leaned toward him before he said a word. She, however, seemed prepared to run. "First time here?" he asked, voice pitched low, so the crowd's chaos faded around them. Her lips curved, uncertain. "Obviously. Not enjoying yourself." Her laugh was small, but disarming. "Is that what you call this? Enjoyment? Feels more like noise in sequins." Dave tilted his head, intrigued. "And yet you came." "My friend insisted. Said it'd be fun." She shrugged, fingers tightening on her bag strap. "So here I am, out of place." "Not out of place," he countered. "Just the only real thing in the room." She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "Smooth talker, aren't you?" "Guilty." He dropped into the chair beside her, without asking, his grin softening into something almost genuine. "I'm Dave." Her gaze lingered, assessing. Then Enya. Enya. He repeated it slowly, savoring. Classic. Not like the princesses floating around here. Is that supposed to be a compliment? The best kind? She laughed then, a quiet sound that tugged at him more than any shout across the dance floor ever had. Minutes bled into more their banter, a dance of wit and challenge. She admitted she hated crowds. He confessed he'd been raised in them. She teased him for his politician's smile. He swore hers was the only one that mattered. Slowly, the noise of the party became background static, drowned by something unspoken threading between them. "Walk with me," Dave said, suddenly rising before she could answer. To where? Somewhere, quieter. The shoreline stretched below the resort, hidden from the chaos above. Malibu's roar softened into ocean hush as they descended the wooden steps. The waves reflected slivers of moonlight. The salt air tasted purer than the champagne upstairs. "Better?" he asked. "Infinitely." They strolled in silence, footsteps sinking into sand. The tension between them wasn't awkward. It was magnetic, pulling them closer with every second. "Do you have a boyfriend?" Enya asked abruptly. "No." He turned to her, eyes glinting. "Do you?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I can tell when someone's playing games." Her gaze flicked to him, daring. He inhaled sharply. "And what if I'm not playing? Then why do you look like you're about to kiss me to prove it?" The smirk returned weaker this time. "Because I want to." The air seemed to hold its breath. She didn't step back. Didn't step forward either. Just whispered, "Depends. Will it be the kind of kiss that forgets, or the kind that remembers?" He didn't answer. He just closed the distance, brushing his lips against hers like a question. She responded with her silence, eyes fluttering shut. It should have ended there. But kisses have a way of writing their own rules. One became another. The taste of salt, heat, and surrender blurred the edges of reason. When he finally pulled away, it was only to lace his fingers through hers and lead her back up the cliff. Not toward the crowd this time, but toward the guest rooms tucked in the east wing of the estate. The night dissolved into shadows, touch-whispered assurances, and unspoken fears. Enya, with her trembling honesty. "I've never done this before." Dave, with his rare vulnerability. "Then we'll go slow." For once, his charm wasn't performance. It was a confession. For once, her defenses weren't shields. They were surrendering. And for a fleeting moment, under the hum of the air conditioner and the glow of city lights bleeding through the curtains, it felt less like a mistake and more like the beginning of something inevitable. The morning, however, was merciless. Dave woke with a pounding skull and the bitter aftertaste of whiskey clinging to his tongue. Sunlight stabbed through the blinds, illuminating a room that wasn't his. His shirt lay crumpled on the floor. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to the sheets. And beside him, Enya, sleeping peacefully, the curve of her shoulder half hidden beneath the blanket. He froze, his mind clawing for memory, and finding nothing but fragments, the ocean, her laugh, a kiss that had burned too deep. Beyond that, blank. Panic surged. What had he done? The son of Governor George Vasquez didn't make mistakes, at least not ones that publicists couldn't spin. But this was something different, something dangerous. And when Enya stirred, blinking awake with a smile so soft it cracked his chest, Dave did the only thing he'd been trained to do. He hid. Behind coldness, behind suspicion, behind words sharper than he intended. "Who are you again?" he muttered. The smile vanished, and in that fragile silence, the tide began to turn. The Malibu sun was unforgiving. It poured through the sheer curtains of the guest room, gilding every surface in merciless clarity. There was no hiding from daylight. Night's secrets always unraveled when dawn arrived. Dave sat at the edge of the bed, head buried in his hands, knuckles white against his temples. The throb of alcohol still pulsed behind his eyes, but worse than the hangover was the hollow chasm in his memory. He had flashes, moonlight on sand, the brush of a smile, the ghost of a kiss, but the rest was blank, as if someone had ripped out the most crucial pages of his life. Behind him, the sheets rustled. Enya stirred her breath, catching softly as she blinked awake. There was a moment, fragile, untainted, when her lips curved into a sleepy smile, the kind that belonged to two people who had shared more than skin. "Good morning," she whispered, voice warm, eyes half-lidded with trust. It should have disarmed him. It should have softened him. But panic is sharper than tenderness. Dave rose abruptly, searching the floor for his shirt phone, anything that anchored him back into the life he recognized. He needed escape and control, because nothing terrified him more than not remembering his choices. Enya frowned, sitting up, the blanket clutched around her chest. "What's wrong?" He froze with his shirt half-buttoned, words tumbling out colder than he meant. Who exactly are you again?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Her smile faltered. The disbelief in her eyes was louder than any accusation. "You're not serious." But he was, or at least he sounded like it. "I don't last night. I don't remember." "Did we?" He gestured vaguely toward the bed, the crumpled sheets. The truth neither of them needed confirmed. What happened here? Color drained from her face, replaced by something raw or hurt. She pulled the blanket tighter, like armor, though nothing could shield her from his words. "Don't do that," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please, don't make it sound like I trapped you. You were the one who stopped." She bit her lip hard and fought the sting in her eyes. Dave's heart stuttered, but his pride tightened the noose. "I was drunk. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing." Her laugh was sharp, breaking under pressure. "So that makes it easier. Pretend it didn't happen. Pretend I don't exist." "I'm not pretending," he snapped through the edge of guilt coiled in his gut. "I just don't remember. And I don't." His words faltered, then fell. "I don't do this. Not like this." Enya's gaze turned to steel, though her hands shook. "Not like this." Then what was last night? An accident? A game? Some disposable story to laugh about at your next party? Her voice rose, echoing against the pristine walls of the room. "Do you know how much courage it took me to stand beside you last night? I don't live in your world, Dave. I don't wear diamonds or float through life on champagne. And yet for one moment, I believed you were different." Dave looked at her then, and the weight of her words pressed against his chest. Different. That was the very word that had drawn him to her. The same thing he had wanted to believe about himself. But fear won again. Fear of weakness, vulnerability, and losing control. "Maybe you shouldn't have believed so easily," he said quietly. The way she flinched would haunt him long after. Enya's jaw tightened, her voice steady now, almost eerily calm. "You think you're the only one who regrets this? You're not. I should have walked away last night. I should have trusted my instincts." She slipped out of bed, the blanket falling as she reached for her dress. The quiet dignity in her movements cut deeper than any anger could. She didn't plead, didn't beg. She gathered herself piece by piece, like someone patching armor before a war. "Enya," he started, but the name caught in his throat, foreign and too intimate all at once. She paused, her back to him, shoulders trembling. When she turned, her eyes were glossy but unbroken. "If respect was too much to ask, you could have at least given me honesty. Not this emptiness." And with that, she walked out, the click of the door sealing the fracture between them. Hours later, the party had dissolved into ruins. Empty bottles, wilted flowers, the scent of cigars, still clinging to the air. Staff scurried to clear the wreckage, while the estate's golden facade gleamed against the Pacific. But Dave didn't see the ocean. He sat alone in the library, the heavy oak shelves pressing around him, his phone buzzing relentlessly with unread messages. Ken had texted twice already, joking about mystery girls and paparazzi flashes. Dave ignored them all. He replayed the morning like a punishment, the way she had looked at him, the way his words had gutted her. Why couldn't he remember? There were gaps before nights blurred by alcohol, but never like this. Never with consequences so sharp they could cut both ways. His mind clawed for scraps, the taste of salt on her lips, the way she'd laughed at the shoreline, the softness in her whisper. And then nothing. Blankness. It terrified him. Because blankness meant he wasn't in control. Enya didn't look back as she walked down the villa's long driveway, her heels clicking against stone. The world outside was still glittering with morning light, but she felt none of its warmth. Each step away from the estate felt both like escape and defeat. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend, the one who'd dragged her into the party in the first place. "OMG, did you leave already?" Everyone's still hungover, LOL. She deleted the message without answering. Malibu's coastline stretched before her, too beautiful, too cruel. She had come to this party by accident, swept into a world she didn't belong to, and now she was leaving with more than just memories. She was going with a wound carved deep into her pride. When she reached the highway, the tears came quiet and unrelenting, not because of what had happened between them, but because of how he had chosen to erase it. That evening, Dave's father returned. Governor Dave Vasquez was a man who carried authority like an unshakable crown. His presence filled the estate from the iron gates to the marble halls. Though he was nearing 60, his frame was still tall, his eyes sharp as if cut from steel. "David," he called, stepping into the library. Dave rose automatically, spine stiffening. "Sir." The governor studied him, one brow arched. "The staff tells me you've been sulking since morning. Care to explain?" "It's nothing. Nothing." George strode forward, voice echoing against leather-bound books. "Then why are paparazzi outside the gates asking about a young woman who left here in tears?" Dave's stomach sank. "They saw her. They see everything." George's gaze hardened. "And they'll twist it until it burns. That's what happens when your name carries weight. A single mistake is never just yours. It's the family's." Dave bristled. "So I'm not allowed to be human?" He cut himself short, fists clenching. "To what?" "To drink until you can't remember your own choices. To treat women as disposable. Do you think people will forgive that because your smile looks good on campaign posters?" The words landed heavy, sharper than Dave expected. He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean intentions don't matter, son. Perception does." George's voice softened then, though it lost none of its authority. "If you can't respect yourself, at least respect the power you hold. Because one day it may not just be your reputation at stake. It may be the lives of people who depend on you." Dave looked away, shame threading through his chest. His father had never raised his voice unnecessarily. That made the quiet disappointment far worse. But beneath it all, Dave couldn't stop thinking of her name. Enya. Enya sat curled on her couch across the city in a small rented apartment above a bakery. The simple walls, the faint smell of bread rising from below the distant hum of traffic, all of it grounded her in a reality that felt safer than the golden prison she had escaped that morning. Her mother's voice rang in her memory. "Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are, Enya." But she felt small now, invisible almost. She wanted to hate him, and part of her did. But another part that remembered his gentleness before the morning turned sour was ached with confusion. Which one was real? The man who had kissed her under the stars, or the man who couldn't bear to remember? Her chest tightened. She didn't have the answer. Not yet. But destiny, as it often did, wasn't finished with them. The next morning, headlines spilled across gossip sites like wildfire. Governor's son spotted with mystery woman at Malibu party. Who is she? Dave Vasquez linked to new romance. From political heiress to unknown beauty. The question of the hour. Enya's photo, blurry, taken from a distance, her white dress glowing under lanterns, was splashed across every page. The comments beneath were crueler than knives. Gold digger. Another scandal waiting to happen. Bet she just wanted the fame. Enya closed the laptop with shaking hands. It was only the beginning. The scent of cinnamon rolls drifted upward through the narrow stairwell, seeping into the tiny apartment above the bakery. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the couch, where Enya sat curled with her knees drawn to her chest. She hadn't slept. 2 days had passed since Malibu, since the party that had felt like an alternate reality, since Dave's voice had sliced through her like glass. Who are you again? The words echoed still sharper in memory than in the moment. Her phone was face down on the coffee table, vibrating every few minutes with notifications she refused to read. Headlines, gossip blogs, random numbers calling with fake friendliness. Even her friend had stopped texting once the photos spread online. It seemed safer to vanish than to be associated with the girl who had caught the governor's son. Caught. As if she'd set a trap. Enya pressed her forehead to her knees and exhaled slowly, reminding herself she hadn't done anything wrong. But innocence didn't protect you from whispers, not in a world addicted to scandal. The sound of keys rattling in the door broke her spiral. Her mother bustled in, balancing a grocery bag against her hip, her laughter filling the room before her words did. "Baby girl, you look like you fought a hurricane," Coring Johnson teased, dropping the bag on the counter. "Sit up. I brought oranges." Enya managed a weak smile. "Not hungry. Not hungry. Since when?" Her mother pulled a chair around, sitting directly across from her. "Tell me, is it the boy?" The question was blunt, but that was Coring's way. She'd been raising Enya alone since her husband passed years ago, and her love carried no pretense. She saw straight through her daughter's silence. Enya looked away. "He doesn't matter." "Then why do your eyes look like they're carrying bricks?" Enya swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "Because I was stupid." Her mother reached across, taking her hand. "No, baby. You were human. There's a difference." The tears that Enya had been holding back for 2 days slipped free. She tried to laugh through them, but the sound came out broken. "He made me feel like I belonged. And then he made me feel invisible." "How do you even process that?" Coring squeezed her hand. "By remembering you've always belonged to yourself first. His memory doesn't decide your worth." Enya leaned into her mother's touch, grateful for its steadiness. But deep inside, another fear gnawed at her, one she hadn't voiced yet. The following week was a blur of work and exhaustion. Enya poured herself into double shifts at the health center, where she assisted, convincing herself that routine would bury the ache. But by the 3rd morning in a row, that she found herself nauseous before breakfast. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she sat in the small examination room, the pregnancy test clutched in her trembling hand. She'd taken it 3 times already, each stick showing the same faint but undeniable result. Positive. Her breath caught the world narrowing to a pinpoint. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth to keep from crying out. Her life shifted in an instant. The ocean air, the whispered kisses, the night she wanted to forget, now it all lived within her, undeniable. A heartbeat waiting to form. She didn't tell anyone that day, not even her mother. She walked home in a daze, her hand brushing her abdomen as though her body might reject the truth. It was late evening when she finally confessed. Her mother was stirring a pot of gumbo in their tiny kitchen, humming off key to an old Motown record. Enya stood in the doorway, twisting her hands until finally blurting out, "Mama, I need to tell you something." Coring glanced over, ladle in hand. "Sounds serious." Enya's voice wavered. "I'm pregnant." The ladle clattered into the pot, splashing broth onto the stove. For a moment, the room was silent except for the bubbling gumbo. Then her mother turned, eyes wide, mouth parting, as if to scold. But laughter erupted instead. "Pregnant, Lord have mercy. I was right." She clutched her stomach, chuckling. "I knew something was different. A mother always knows." "Mama, this isn't funny." Enya's voice broke. "I don't know what to do." The laughter softened. Coring crossed the room, cupping her daughter's face gently. "Baby girl, listen to me. This is not the end of your life. It's the beginning of someone else's. And you're stronger than you think, but it's his." The words spilled out, weighted with shame and confusion. "It's Dave's, and he doesn't even remember. He doesn't care. Stop." Her mother's voice firmed. "His father's memory does not define this child, or his lack of it. Your love defines this child." Enya's tears finally fell fast and unstoppable. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing into the shoulder that had carried her through every storm. 2 weeks later, she stood at the gates of the Vasquez estate. The iron bars loomed high, gilded with authority, guarded by men in suits who looked at her as though she were trespassing. Her hands shook as she pressed them over the curve of her stomach, still small but real enough to be undeniable. "State your name," the guard said. Her throat felt dry, but she forced the words out. "Enya Johnson. Tell Dave I'm here." The guard's brows shot up, but he disappeared inside. Minutes later, he returned. "You may enter." The gravel driveway crunched under her shoes as she walked toward the mansion's sprawling facade. Each step carried the weight of every sleepless night, every whisper of doubt, every beat of her heart. Inside, she found him in the living room. Dave rose slowly from the couch, a coffee cup in hand, his expression unreadable. His hair was tousled, his eyes bloodshot, but he looked every bit the privileged heir in his casual designer shirt. "What are you doing here?" His voice was cold, clipped. Enya's heart pounded. She steadied her breath, squared her shoulders, and met his gaze. "I'm pregnant," she said. "And it's yours." The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Dave laughed, a bitter sound. "You expect me to believe that? After one night I don't even remember." Her hands balled into fists. "I don't need you to believe it. I need you to know it." But before either could speak again, another voice thundered through the room. "David." Both turned. Governor George Vasquez strode in his presence, dominating the space. His eyes flicked from Enya's pale face to Dave's stunned expression, then to the broken cup on the floor. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Enya drew in a breath, trembling but unflinching. "I'm Enya Johnson, and I'm carrying your grandchild." The room stilled. Dave's mouth opened, but his father silenced him with a raised hand. The governor's gaze locked onto Enya, piercing, assessing. And then, to her shock, he smiled, not cruelly, but with something resembling respect. "You're brave," George said. "Most would have hidden. But you came here." He turned to his son, his voice sharp as steel. "And you look at what you've done." Dave swallowed words, failing him for the first time in years. George stepped closer to Enya, his tone softening. "You'll stay here. I'll see that you're cared for. Whatever my son chooses, this child will not suffer for his weakness." Enya blinked, tears burning her eyes. She hadn't expected acceptance. Not here. Dave, meanwhile, looked as if the ground had shifted beneath him. That night, Enya lay awake in the guest room the governor had arranged for her. The mansion was quiet, its vast halls echoing with secrets. She pressed her hand to her stomach, whispering into the darkness. "You're not alone," she said softly. "I'll fight for you no matter what." And though her voice trembled, there was a fire beneath it now. She wasn't just a girl who had been forgotten. She was a mother, and she would no longer be erased. The Vasquez mansion stood like a fortress against the Beverly Hills sky, its ivory walls gleaming in the late afternoon sun. To Enya, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. She sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, and the governor insisted it be prepared for her. The porcelain trembled slightly in her hands. She had never tasted tea this expensive before, nor sat in a chair overlooking acres of manicured gardens. The breeze was warm, scented faintly with jasmine. It should have been calming, but she was anything but calm. Inside these walls, whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Staff exchanged glances when she entered a room. Some smiled kindly. Others measured her with the same skepticism the world outside already hurled at her. She was the woman who had dared walk into a palace with nothing but a trembling truth, and left with the governor's unexpected blessing. Governor George Vasquez had taken her side from the first moment, his voice firm as marble. "She carries my grandchild. That makes her family." Dave had not said a word in reply. That silence haunted her more than cruelty would have. Later that evening, the mansion's library became a courtroom. The governor sat in his leather armchair, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his presence commanding as always. Dave stood near the window, restless, his jaw clenched. Enya lingered at the threshold, uncertain whether she was allowed in. "Come." George beckoned her. "You're part of this conversation." Her steps were quiet, but her heart pounded like a drum. Father Dave began, frustration edging his tone. "Don't." George cut in. George, his gaze sharp. "You will listen." Dave's fists tightened at his sides, but he said nothing. George turned to Enya, his expression softening. "You have nothing to fear here. Whatever happens, you and the child will be protected. That is my word." Enya nodded faintly, gratitude swelling in her chest, though her throat was too tight to form words. Now George continued, facing his son. "Do you understand what you've done?" Dave exhaled sharply. "I know the situation. What I don't understand is why you're ready to parade this girl into our lives. When what?" The governor interrupted. "When is she carrying your child? When has she shown more courage in one evening than you've shown in your lifetime?" Enya froze, the words slicing the air between father and son. Dave turned, his blue eyes catching hers. For a fleeting moment, there was something there, regret perhaps or longing, but it vanished behind a mask of indifference. "I never asked for this," he said coldly. The governor's reply. "David, children rarely ask to be born. That doesn't make them less your responsibility." The silence that followed was suffocating. Enya's chest tightened, caught between gratitude for the governor's defense and the sting of Dave's denial. The scandal arrived the next morning like a storm. Every major outlet had splashed her face across its pages. "Mystery woman moves into governor's mansion. Enya Johnson. Cinderella or gold digger." Television anchors debated her worth as if she were a Wall Street stock. Talk show hosts mocked the overnight heiress, dissecting blurry paparazzi photos of her carrying groceries with her mother. Enya sat in the breakfast room with the paper spread before her, her appetite gone. Her spoon hovered over the untouched bowl of fruit. "Don't read it," George advised, stepping in with his usual steady stride. He folded the paper in half and set it aside. "They feed on weakness." "It's not a weakness to feel," Enya whispered. The governor's gaze softened. "No, it's not. but don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you bleed." She tried to smile, but her heart ached. She had always believed the truth was enough to protect her. But truth had to be guarded like treasure in this house and world. From the hallway, she heard voices. Dave's voice sharp with irritation, and his aides rushed replies. "They've turned her into a headline," Dave barked. "If this keeps up, the campaign will survive worse." George's voice cut in from behind her louder now. "What won't survive is your soul, if you keep pretending this woman and child don't matter." The aide slipped away, leaving father and son colliding like storms. Enya rose quietly, retreating to her room, before they noticed her. But even as she walked, she caught fragments of their words, jagged as glass. "She doesn't belong here. Neither do you, if this is the man you choose to be." That night, Enya found herself unable to sleep. The mansion was silent, except for the occasional creak of wood and the distant hum of cars along Sunset Boulevard. She sat by the window, staring at the city lights, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. She thought of her mother's tiny kitchen, the smell of gumbo, the laughter that had once made everything simpler. She longed for that simplicity now, but knew there was no turning back. A knock startled her. She rose hesitant and opened the door to find Dave standing there. His posture was uncertain, his eyes shadowed. For once, he didn't look like the polished air of California. He looked lost. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Enya's instinct was to slam the door, but something in his voice, fragile, almost pleading, made her step aside. He entered, pacing the carpet, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be what everyone expects." Enya crossed her arms. "You think I do? I never asked for any of this. I didn't ask for you to forget me. I didn't ask for your father to treat me like family while you treat me like a stranger." His jaw clenched. "I never meant—" "Yes, you did." Her voice shook, but she pressed on. "You meant every word when you pushed me away. And now you're here because you can't stand how the world sees you. This isn't about me, or the baby. This is about your pride." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Dave exhaled. "You're right." Her breath caught, startled by his honesty. He looked up, his gaze raw. "But I want to try. I don't know how, but I don't want to keep being the man who makes you feel invisible." Something in her chest softened despite herself. But before she could answer, the shrill ring of the mansion's phone echoed down the hallway. Moments later, George's voice called out, "David, get down here. It's the press, they're outside the gates. And they're not leaving until they get answers." Dave's face paled. He turned to Enya, eyes wide, a flicker of panic flashing across his features. The storm had arrived. And this time, they would face it together, or be torn apart. The mansion gates hadn't known peace in days. Every morning, clusters of cameras bloomed like weeds along the sidewalk, flashes sparking each time the iron bars creaked open. Reporters shouted questions into the air, their microphones thrust forward like they could pierce the fortress walls. Inside the Vasquez estate was a different storm. Staff hurried through corridors, their eyes darting toward Enya whenever she passed. She wore borrowed maternity dresses. The governor's assistant had rushed out to buy simple cotton in muted colors, but nothing could stop her from feeling like an exhibit. Her every step seemed to echo, "She doesn't belong. She doesn't belong." At breakfast, the silence was suffocating. George Vasquez sat at the head of the table, calm, as if the world beyond the gates didn't exist. Dave sat 3 seats away, staring at his coffee, as though it contained all the answers he couldn't give. Enya toyed with a piece of toast, appetite absent. The governor set down his fork. "Enough of this funeral silence," he declared. His baritone filled the room. "We face this together. Tonight, I will address the press myself." Dave looked up sharply. father that's necessary. George's gaze was steel. I won't let them crucify her for your mistakes. Enya's breath caught. Gratitude warred with fear. The idea of standing under a spotlight, her name dissected by millions, made her stomach twist. Governor, you don't have to, she began softly. I do, he interrupted, because you are family now, whether my son accepts it or not. The words fell heavily, landing squarely on Dave. He flinched almost imperceptibly, then hid it behind a sip of coffee. By evening, the estate's front steps had transformed into a stage. A podium stood under the glow of mounted lights, flags rippling behind it. Cameramen jostled for position. The air buzzed with anticipation. Enya watched from an upstairs window, her heart hammering. She could see the governor's broad frame as he stepped into view, his presence commanding silence. Good evening, George began, his voice steady as the Pacific. I address the rumors concerning my son David and Ms. Enya Johnson. Her name rang out, broadcast live. Enya's knees nearly gave. George continued, his tone deliberate. Yes, she is staying in this house. Yes, she is expecting a child. And yes, the child is my grandchild. No speculation, character assassination, or smear campaigns against her will exist. Not while I draw breath. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Journalists scribbled furiously. Let me be clear, George pressed on. Ms. Johnson is not a scandal. She is a young woman who has shown extraordinary strength. And if the world insists on painting her as anything less, let them take it up with me, not her. Applause broke from some corners, though not all. Cameras flashed wildly. Enya's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She felt seen for the first time in days, not as gossip fodder, but as someone worth protecting. But when she glanced across the room, she found Dave leaning against the wall. Arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Later, the house buzzed with aftershocks. Phones rang incessantly. News anchors replayed George's speech, praising his candor or condemning his recklessness. Political allies called to congratulate. Opponents seethed. Enya slipped into the garden for air, her hands brushing across the lavender bushes lining the path. The night was incredible, the city's hum distant. For a moment she let herself breathe, until footsteps crunched behind her. Quite the show. Dave's voice, low and edged, broke the quiet. She turned. He stood in shadow, his features half hidden by moonlight. You think this is a show? She asked softly. He shrugged, though tension rippled through him. That's how it looks. Headlines, cameras, speeches. My father was defending you, as though he stopped himself. As though what? She pressed. As though you already belong here. His jaw tightened. And maybe you do. That may be what scares me. Her heart skipped. His honesty wasn't a weapon, for once it was raw, trembling. But before she could respond, a new voice cut through the night. Well, isn't this cozy? They both turned. A woman approached down the stone path, her heels clicking against marble, her presence electric. She was striking tall, poised, wrapped in a crimson dress that shimmered under the lights. Her blonde hair cascaded in polished waves, her smile sharp as glass. Claire. Dave breathed, stiffening. The name landed like thunder. Claire Donovan, heiress to Donovan Media, daughter of the man who controlled half the state's press, and Dave's former girlfriend. Enya's pulse spiked. Surprised to see me, Claire purred, sliding her gaze toward Enya with thinly veiled disdain. The press conference was inspiring. My father insisted we come personally. After all, this little situation has captured every headline he owns. Dave's shoulders stiffened. This isn't the time. Oh, I think it is. Claire's smile widened. Because if the governor plans to turn this accident into a family legacy, then the public should know who's rewriting the script. Her eyes flicked to Enya's stomach. Then back to her face, the message cruelly clear. Enya's breath caught heat rising to her cheeks. She wanted to retort, to defend herself, but words stuck like thorns in her throat. Dave stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Enough. But Claire only tilted her head, unshaken. Careful, darling. You wouldn't want me to remind the world who you were with before her, or what you said about never being tied down. Silence fell heavy, the weight of unspoken history pressing down. And in that moment, Enya realized this wasn't just about her anymore. This was war. Later that night, Enya lay awake in her room, her thoughts spiraling. The image of Claire lingered like smoke, sharp and suffocating. She had always known Dave's world was filled with polished women, women who belonged in the spotlight, women bred for power. But seeing one stand before her armed with influence and secrets made her feel small again. She pressed her hand over her abdomen. You're real. You're mine. No one can erase that. Yet doubts gnawed at her. Could she survive this battle? Could she protect her child in a world that saw her as nothing but a scandal? Somewhere down the hall, Dave argued with his father in harsh whispers. Enya couldn't hear the words but caught the tone. Frustration, defiance, shame. And she wondered, as tears pricked her eyes, whether Dave would ever truly stand beside her, or if he would always remain on the other side of the battlefield. The next morning, the newspapers screamed a new headline. Claire Donovan returns, love triangle in the Vasquez mansion. Enya's stomach turned as she stared at the page. The photo showed Claire sweeping into the mansion, like a queen with Dave behind her with a grim expression. The subtext was clear. They weren't just coming for her. They were rewriting the story. The morning sun spilled across the marble floors of the Vasquez mansion, but the warmth did little to ease the hall's chill. Enya could feel it in the air, the way conversations hushed when she walked past, the way staff traded glances, as if silently choosing sides. Claire Donovan's presence had changed everything. She moved through the estate like she owned it, heels tapping decisively against polished wood, her perfume lingering long after she left a room. With her perfect smile and sharper tongue, she was impossible to ignore. Enya tried. She spent her mornings in the garden, with a book, her afternoons sketching quietly in her room, anything to avoid confrontation. But avoidance only worked until confrontation came knocking, and it did sooner than expected. It happened at lunch. The governor had insisted on a formal meal in the dining hall, perhaps to restore a sense of order. The table stretched endlessly, crystal glasses glinting in the chandelier's light. Enya sat halfway down, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Dave and Claire occupied seats near the head. Claire's laughter tinkled like glass as she recounted some anecdote from her father's gala. The staff laughed too, though the sound rang hollow. And then Claire said, flashing a smile in Enya's direction, "The senator told me I'd make a perfect political wife." Can you imagine? The words dripped with insinuation. Enya stiffened, but kept her eyes on her plate. The governor, however, noticed. "Political wife," he repeated. "That requires more than parties and speeches, Ms. Donovan. It requires backbone, integrity." Claire's smile didn't falter, though her eyes flashed. "Of course, Governor. That's why some of us are born for it." Her gaze slid back to Enya, lingering. "And some of us aren't." The air crackled. Forks paused mid-air. Enya set her napkin down slowly, her pulse roaring in her ears. She could stay silent, swallow the insult, pretend it didn't pierce. But something inside her, perhaps the child she carried, maybe the memory of her mother's voice, refused to let her shrink. She lifted her chin. "Integrity isn't inherited, Claire. It's proven. And I don't need a senator's compliment to know my worth." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Claire's smile flickered, but only for a moment. Then she leaned back, eyes glinting. She said smoothly, We'll see how long the world agrees with you. The governor's booming laugh broke the tension. That's the spirit, Enya. Finally, someone is willing to speak the truth at this table. Enya's cheeks flushed, but not from embarrassment. For the first time, she had defended herself without apology. And though Dave said nothing, his eyes lingered on her longer than before, something unreadable flickering behind them. That night, Enya found herself restless. She wandered the mansion's halls until she reached the veranda, where the city glittered far below like a sea of stars. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt his presence. Dave leaned against the railing, a glass of whiskey in hand. His posture was casual, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "You held your own today," he said, finally, his voice quiet. She turned. "Were you expecting me not to?" His lips curved faintly. "I wasn't sure." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken things. Finally, Enya crossed her arms. "You didn't defend me." Dave stiffened. "It would have made things worse. It would have shown you cared." The words hung in the air. His gaze met hers, and he didn't look away for once. "You think I don't?" Her heart stumbled, but she forced herself to hold steady. "You're too afraid to." The glass trembled in his hand before he set it down with a sharp clink. "You don't understand the pressure. The cameras, the expectations." "I understand enough," she interrupted. "I grew up with nothing, Dave, no camera's power or father to clean up my messes. If I can stand in front of the world and carry this child with my head high, you can stand beside me. Or don't. But stop hiding behind excuses." Her voice broke not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. For a moment, Dave said nothing. Then quietly, "You make it sound so easy." Enya's laugh was bitter. "It's not easy. It's survival." She left him there staring into the night, his reflection fractured in the glass of his untouched whiskey. The next day, Claire struck again. This time it wasn't subtle. She had arranged an interview with Donovan Media, her father's empire, and somehow Enya was pulled into the spectacle. The crew arrived at the mansion under the guise of a family feature. Cameras were set up in the drawing room, lights glaring against polished wood. George agreed reluctantly, believing it better to control the narrative than let rumors fester unchecked. But Enya hadn't expected to be summoned. When she entered, Claire was seated elegantly beside Dave, her crimson dress a deliberate echo of the first night she appeared. Dave looked uncomfortable, but his silence was complicit. "Enya," Claire said sweetly, patting the empty chair across from her. "Why don't you join us? After all, the world is curious about you." The crew's eyes brightened, hungry. Enya hesitated, then sat her spine straight. The interviewer smiled. "Ms. Johnson, people are calling you a mystery. Some say you're an opportunist, others that you're brave. What do you say to those who question why you're here?" Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe. She thought of her mother's gumbo, her small apartment's warmth, and the child she carried. "I didn't choose to be in this spotlight," she said softly, "but I won't apologize for telling the truth. I am carrying a life. That life deserves respect no matter who the father is. If people can't accept that, perhaps the problem isn't me, but how they measure worth." The room stilled. Claire's smile faltered just slightly. The interviewer blinked, then cleared his throat. "Strong words, Ms. Johnson." Enya folded her hands, steady now. "Strong because they're real." The interview aired that night. Clips spread across social media within hours. Some mocked her, others praised her. But one moment replayed more than any other, her quiet, steady voice saying, "The problem isn't me, but how they measure worth." It became a headline, a hashtag. And for the first time, the narrative wasn't entirely against her. But Claire wasn't finished. The following morning, a new headline emerged, planted with surgical precision. Exclusive: Dave Vasquez's Ex-girlfriend breaks silence. The article painted Claire as the faithful partner of California's golden heir, the woman wronged by circumstance, who had always been by his side. Photos of her and Dave at past galas resurfaced gleaming smiles under chandeliers. The article contrasted her polished legacy with Enya's humble background, implying the choice was obvious. Enya read the piece in silence, her hands trembling. Each word felt like a knife carving away her dignity. When she looked up, she found Dave standing in the doorway, the paper clutched in his hand too. His expression was stormy, but not directed at her, directed at himself. "Enya," he began. But she stood, her voice steady, despite the tears burning her eyes. "Don't. I don't need apologies. I need choices. And right now, you're not making any." She brushed past him, leaving him in the doorway, caught between two worlds. And somewhere deep in her chest, Enya realized this battle was no longer just about survival. It was about claiming the life she deserved. The days blurred into a strange rhythm. Morning sun on white marble evenings, thick with whispers, and Enya caught somewhere between unwanted guest and unexpected anchor. Governor Dave Vasquez had made his stance clear. Wherever Enya walked, she was treated as family, not by the staff, the headlines, but by him. He spoke to her, not as a politician, polishing an image, but as a man who saw her strength and refused to let it go unnoticed. "You remind me of my late wife," he told her one afternoon, as they sat beneath the oak trees in the garden. He stirred his tea absently, his gaze softened by memory. She had that same fire. Quiet when she chose to be fierce, when she needed to be. Enya blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know if I'm fierce, Governor." He chuckled. "You stood your ground against Claire Donovan at my table. That takes more than courage. It takes character. Don't underestimate yourself." Something in her chest warmed though guilt shadowed it. Dave should have been the one to say those words. Instead, it was his father. That night, Dave found them talking in the library, the governor laughing warmly at something Enya had said. For a moment, Dave lingered unseen in the doorway, watching. His chest tightened. When Enya excused herself and slipped out, Dave entered. "You seem to enjoy her company," he muttered. George looked up from his glass of bourbon, because she spoke the truth. "David, a rare thing in this house." Dave's jaw clenched. "She's complicating everything." "No," George corrected, his voice firm. "She's clarifying everything. The only complication is your refusal to face what matters." Dave's fists tightened, but he said nothing. He left the library with anger burning in his veins, though he couldn't tell if it was directed at his father Enya or himself. Meanwhile, outside the mansion walls, the war escalated. Claire Donovan's empire churned out stories with ruthless precision. Unfit mother, political liability, a distraction that could cost the governor his re-election. One paper even published a doctored photo of Enya looking disheveled, exiting a grocery store, her hand protectively over her stomach, captioned, "Is this the woman to carry California's future?" The cruelty was endless, but politics had no patience for sensitivity. George's advisors urged him to distance himself. "Governor, she's a weakness," one said bluntly. "She could sink you." George silenced them with a glare. "Then let me sink standing beside what is right." Enya overheard this from the hallway, her throat tightening. She wanted to run, to disappear, to spare him the risk. But another part of her, stronger, now refused to keep shrinking. The breaking point came with the charity gala. Every year, the Vasquez family hosted a fundraiser for children's hospitals. It was the kind of event where cameras never stopped flashing. Every smile was dissected, and reputations could rise or crumble in one evening. This year, All eyes would be on Enya. She wanted to refuse, but George insisted. If you don't stand tall now, Claire wins. And more importantly, the child you carry deserves to see a mother who never bowed. So she agreed, though fear coiled tight in her chest. The gala shimmered with chandeliers and champagne. Women draped in gowns glittered like jewels. Men in tuxedos clinked glasses with rehearsed charm. The air reeked of perfume and power. Enya entered on George's arm, wearing a navy gown, chosen to be elegant, but modest. Her heart hammered, as flashes blinded her reporters, calling her name like vultures circling prey. Beside her, George was immovable, a fortress. "Smile, Iha," he whispered. "Show them you cannot be broken." She tried. Inside whispers followed her like shadows. That's her. The girl. The scandal. And then Claire appeared. She descended the staircase in a gown of liquid silver, every inch a queen who believed the throne was hers. The crowd parted around her, admiration dripping from their gazes. She approached Enya with a smile that could slice marble. "Well, don't you clean up nicely?" she said sweetly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Almost looks like you belong." Enya's pulse quickened, but she steadied her voice. "Almost, or enough to make you nervous." Gasps rippled. Someone stifled a laugh. Claire's eyes narrowed, but her smile never wavered. "Careful, darling. You're playing in a league you don't understand." Enya's reply was calm, deliberate. "Maybe, but leagues change. Dynasties fall, and the world loves an underdog." George's booming laugh broke the tension, startling the crowd. "Well said, Enya," he declared, clapping her shoulder. The guests murmured, some approving, others scandalized. Cameras flashed furiously, and for once, the story wasn't just Claire's to control. But the night wasn't done. Midway through the gala, Claire made her move. She approached a group of reporters, her voice dripping sympathy. "It's just sad. Poor Enya. So young, so unprepared, and yet so determined to climb. I do hope the baby will be all right, considering." She let the implication dangle, cruel and calculated. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the room. The rumor had already taken flight. Enya was careless, endangering her pregnancy for attention. Enya heard the whispers, saw the glances shift, felt the weight of judgment pressing down. Panic clawed at her chest. But then she remembered her mother's voice. "Don't let them write your story for you, Anak." So when a microphone was thrust into her face, she straightened. "I'm here tonight," she said, her voice clear, carrying over the crowd. "Not to prove myself to those who doubt me. I'm here because children in hospitals deserve better care, better futures. If anyone wants to question my worth, that's fine. But don't use my child to do it. This baby is not a scandal. This baby is hope." The ballroom stilled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, scattered applause broke out. First hesitant, then stronger. Guests who had doubted her now found themselves clapping. Even some reporters lowered their cameras and moved despite themselves. Claire's smile cracked brittle under the weight of Enya's words. And in the corner, Dave watched with something like awe, his chest tightening, as he realized that while he had been silent, Enya had spoken with fire that no one could extinguish. Later, as the gala wound down, Enya slipped onto the balcony for air. The city lights stretched endlessly, a million stars burning below. She closed her eyes, letting the cool night steady her. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes to find Dave standing there. His tuxedo loosened his gaze raw. "You were incredible tonight," he admitted softly. Enya's lips curved, but there was no humor in her smile. "I wasn't incredible. I was desperate." "Desperate can be powerful," he said. Silence fell between them, thick with everything he hadn't said. Finally, he stepped closer. "I don't want to keep standing on the sidelines, Enya. I want to." But before he could finish, George's voice boomed from inside, calling for him. Dave hesitated, torn between duty and desire. Enya lowered her gaze. Go. That's who you are, Dave, always answering someone else before yourself. Her words struck harder than any insult, and as he left, she turned back to the lights, her hand over her stomach, whispering to the life within her. I'll fight for us, even if he never does. The next morning, the headlines surprised them all. Enya Johnson speaks. This baby is not a scandal. This baby is hope. The clip had gone viral overnight. Strangers tweeted her words. Mothers wrote in support. Children's hospitals even sent messages of gratitude. For the first time, public opinion wasn't entirely against her. But victory had a price. Because in another corner of the city, Claire Donovan sat before a mirror, her smile gone, her eyes cold. She picked up her phone and whispered to an unseen ally, "It's time we play dirtier." The storm broke on a Monday morning. Enya awoke to the sound of raised voices in the corridor. Her heart quickened as she slipped from her bed, her bare feet silent against the carpet. Outside her door, staff whispered nervously, clutching newspapers and phones. Something was wrong. She reached for one of the papers and froze. Her face stared back at her from the front page, eyes, wide lips parted in what looked like a drunken laugh. Beside her was a blurred photo of a man, his arm slung over her shoulder, a cocktail glass in his hand. Governor's future, daughter-in-law, caught in late-night scandal. The caption screamed, betrayal. Enya's knees went weak. This isn't real," she whispered. But the photo burned into her vision, cruel in its fabrication. By the time she reached the dining room, George was already there, phone pressed to his ear, his expression thunderous. Dave stood near the window, jaw-clenched eyes flicking toward her, as if he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. George slammed his phone down. "They've crossed the line. Donovan Media is doing this. I'd stake my career on it." Enya gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "It's fake. I know," George cut in firmly. His gaze was steel. "But the world doesn't care about truth. They care about headlines." Dave finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We can sue. Demand a retraction." George shook his head. "By the time the courts move, the damage will be done." He turned to Enya, his expression softening. "You need to stay calm. Please don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break." But Enya already felt broken. The fallout was merciless. Television hosts replayed the photo, dissecting every pixel. Social media buzzed with speculation. Had Enya been lying all along? Was the baby? Even Dave's reporters swarmed the mansion gates, shouting accusations through megaphones. "Enya. Did you cheat, Enya? Who is the man in the photo?" She couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of their judgment. Even inside, whispers followed her. Staff who had once been kind now averted their eyes. That evening, alone in her room, she pressed a hand to her belly, tears spilling freely. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life inside her. "I wanted to be strong, but I don't know how much more I can take." The door opened quietly. Dave stood there, hesitant. His face was drawn, exhaustion etched into his features. "I know it's not true," he said softly. Her eyes lifted to his, brimming with pain. "Do you? Because everyone else seems to believe it." "I believe you," he insisted. "Then say it," she challenged, her voice trembling. "Say it where the world can hear. Say it to your father, to the press, to Claire." Silence stretched. His lips parted, but no words came. Her heart shattered a little more. "That's what I thought." She turned away, unable to watch his silence crush her again. The next day, George convened a meeting with his advisors. Enya wasn't meant to overhear, but she did, standing just beyond the half-closed door. She's a liability, one advisor said coldly. Claire has the media in her pocket. This photo, real or fake, will stick. Governor, if you want to save your campaign, distance yourself now. George's voice thundered in reply. I will not abandon her. That child is my blood. Blood won't win elections. Another snapped. Optics will. There was a pause. Then George's voice again, low, dangerous. Then perhaps I no longer care about winning. Enya's breath caught. The loyalty in his words seared her heart. But guilt weighed heavily. She was dragging him into ruin. She fled before they could see her tears. That evening, the tension snapped. Claire arrived at the mansion uninvited but unstoppable. She glided into the drawing room, a silk scarf draped carelessly around her shoulders, her smile dripping venom. Well, she said brightly, holding up a copy of the paper. Looks like your little fairy tale is over. Dave surged to his feet, fury sparking in his eyes. Enough, Claire. She arched a brow. Don't tell me you're defending her now. After everything, even you can't deny how damning this looks. It's fake, Dave spat. Claire laughed low and mocking. Oh, darling, the public doesn't care about the truth. They care about stories. And right now, I'm the heroine of this one. You, me, the golden couple. Enya. She's just a footnote. Enya's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to meet Claire's gaze. You can try to erase me, Claire, but you can't erase this child. She placed a protective hand on her stomach. For the first time, Claire's mask cracked. Her eyes flickered cold and calculating. Children can be raised without mothers, Enya. Remember that. The threat sent ice down Enya's spine. Dave stepped between them, his voice low and furious. Get out. If you ever threaten her again, I swear. Claire smiled, sweet and poisonous. Careful, David. Empty promises don't scare me. But she left her heels clicking like gunshots down the hall. Enya sank into a chair, trembling. Dave knelt before her, his hand hovering over hers, but not quite touching. I should have protected you sooner, he whispered. Her eyes burned. Then start now. The days that followed were a blur of fear and whispers. George tried to shield her, but his influence couldn't silence the storm. And then hope arrived in an unexpected form. A knock sounded on the mansion's side door one evening. A guard opened it to find a woman standing there, her clothes plain, her eyes nervous. My name is Lisa, she said quietly. I used to work for Donovan Media, and I know the truth about that photo. The revelation landed like lightning. Lisa explained everything in George's study, her hands trembling as she placed a flash drive on the desk. Claire paid to have the photo doctored. I couldn't live with it. Here, this has the originals. Proof that Enya was never there. Enya's breath caught hope and disbelief warring inside her. George took the drive, his face grave. If this is true, you've done a brave thing. Dave leaned forward, his voice fierce. We'll use this. We'll expose her. For the first time, his eyes burned not with hesitation, but with conviction. He looked at Enya, his hand finally finding hers. She tried to destroy you. I won't let her win. Enya's chest tightened, her heart pounding with something dangerously close to faith. But even as relief flooded her, a whisper of fear remained. Claire Donovan wouldn't go down quietly. And somewhere deep in the city, Claire sat before her mirror, pouring herself a glass of wine. They think they've won, she murmured, her smile sharp. But the game isn't over. The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 11, the mansion buzzed like a hive, corridors echoing with footsteps, phones ringing off the hook, aides whispering urgent instructions. Enya sat in the drawing room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her reflection in the gilt-edged mirror revealed the tension in her face, the storm in her eyes. Dave entered quietly, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. For once, he looked less like the governor's son and more like a man preparing for battle. He stopped in front of her. "Are you ready?" "No," she admitted, "but I'll go anyway." His lips curved faintly, admiration flickering. "That's braver than most politicians I know." Before she could answer, George appeared already in full command mode. "Come time to end this farce." The front steps of the mansion blazed under the California sun. Cameras lined the gates, reporters jostling for position. Flashes erupted as George strode forward, Enya and Dave at his side. "My fellow citizens," the governor began, his baritone rolling over the crowd. "For days, lies have been weaponized against a young woman carrying my grandchild. Today, we end those lies." He held up a folder brandishing still frames from the doctored photo. "This image spread across your screens is a fabrication. And here is the proof." He gestured to Lisa, who stood trembling but resolute beside an aide. "Originals untouched." Enya Johnson was never there. Gasps rippled. Cameras clicked wildly. George's voice thundered on. "The actual scandal here is not Enya Johnson. It is the corruption of truth manipulated by those who fear her strength." Enya's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't merely defended, she was vindicated. The press swarmed with questions, but George raised a hand, silencing them. "This matter is closed. Anyone who says otherwise will answer not only to me, but to the law." For a fleeting moment, the tide turned. Reporters muttered approval. Social media buzzed with clips praising George's integrity and Enya's quiet resilience. Hashtags flipped, hard stand with Enya trended across platforms. But victories in politics are never absolute. That evening, the backlash arrived like a whip. Claire Donovan appeared on live television, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her smile contrite. "I regret the confusion," she purred. "But shouldn't we ask why Governor Vasquez hides deeper secrets, if we're discussing integrity?" The interviewer leaned forward. "Secrets." Claire's eyes gleamed. "Financial dealings, questionable donations." And as for Enya, she paused, her voice dripping with sympathy. "I hope she's safe. Pregnancy is fragile, especially under this kind of stress." It was a dagger wrapped in silk. Within hours, headlines screamed anew, "Donovan strikes back." Rumors of corruption spread like wildfire. Hashtags flipped again. In the mansion, aides erupted in panic. "She's poisoning the well, Governor, if this sticks." George silenced them with a glare, but his face was grim. Enya, listening from the corner, felt the ground tilt beneath her. "She'll never stop," she whispered. "No," Dave said, his jaw tight. "She won't unless we make her." The days that followed blurred into chaos. Protesters gathered outside the gates, some chanting to support George and Enya, others hurling insults. Paparazzi camped on every corner. Enya couldn't step near a window without a flash exploding. And then came the threats. Notes slipped under doors. Anonymous calls in the night. One morning, as Enya walked through the garden, a stone crashed against the wall beside her. And there was a note tied to it. "Leave before it's too late." Her heart raced, her hand instinctively, shielding her stomach. Dave found her minutes later, pale and trembling. He snatched up the stone, fury blazing in his eyes. "This has gone too far." "Dave," she began, but he cut her off, voice raw. "I won't let them hurt you. Not again. Not ever." For the first time, she saw him not as the silent son, but as a man cornered and ready to fight. The turning point came with another gala hosted by the Donovans. Invitations had been sent to every influential figure in California. The message was clear. Claire wasn't retreating. George forbade Enya from attending. "It's a trap," he warned. But Enya shook her head. It's not just your fight anymore. If I hide, she wins. If I show up, if I stand there unshaken, people will see. Dave looked at her torn. They'll tear you apart. Then let them try, she said softly. I'm done being afraid. The Donovan estate glittered like a jewel that night, chandeliers spilling light over marble floors, guests dripping wealth and power. Enya entered on Dave's arm, her gown black and sleek, her presence commanding in its simplicity. Gasps followed her. Whispers rose. Claire descended the staircase like a goddess, silver gown, shimmering smile sharp. She said sweetly, "How brave of you to come," eyes scanning Enya's form. "I wasn't sure you'd survive the week." Enya's pulse pounded, but her voice was steady. "I don't break as easily as your stories." Guests murmured, eyes widening. Claire's smile faltered, then sharpened. "Be careful, darling. You're in my house now." But Enya didn't flinch. "No, I'm in our state. And the people watching us, they deserve better than lies." Applause rippled, hesitant but real. Cameras flashed. For once the script Claire had written refused to hold. Dave leaned close, his whisper fierce. "You're winning them." But Enya's eyes stayed locked on Claire. This isn't about winning, it's about surviving. The night ended with another twist. As Dave escorted Enya toward the exit, a commotion erupted outside. Reporters surged, flashing cameras, blinding questions hurled like stones. In the chaos, a figure lunged a protester, face-masked, shouting obscenities. Security restrained him, but not before Enya stumbled, nearly falling. Dave caught her, his arms wrapping around her protectively. Cameras caught it all. The panic, the fear, the way his body shielded hers. By midnight, the photo spread across every screen, Dave holding Enya, her eyes squeezed shut, his face fierce with protectiveness. And suddenly the narrative shifted again. Not a scandal, not a liability. A story of a woman fighting to be heard, and a man learning to stand beside her. Back at the mansion, Enya sat in her room exhausted, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Dave knelt before her, his hand covering hers. "I almost lost you tonight," he whispered. "But you didn't," she said softly, "and I'm still here." His eyes searched hers, raw and unguarded. "Then let me be here too." No more silence. No more excuses. From now on, I stand with you. Her breath caught hope flickering to life. But before she could answer, George entered, his face grave. "We've won a battle. But Claire will strike back harder. And next time, she won't just use lies." Enya's hand tightened over her stomach. She knew then the real war was beginning. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a battlefield. For weeks, whispers had grown into roars. The Donovans launched their final assault, an expose accusing Governor Dave Vasquez of corruption, bribery, and betrayal of the people he swore to serve. The evidence was shaky, but the timing was lethal. With re-election looming, one wrong move could collapse everything. Reporters camped at the gates day and night. Protesters clashed on the sidewalks, some chanting George's name, others calling for his resignation. And at the center of it all was Enya. "Claire won't stop until she destroys you," Dave muttered one night, pacing the study like a caged lion. His eyes were bloodshot, his fists tight. Enya sat quietly in the armchair, one hand over her belly. "She doesn't want to destroy me," she said softly. "She wants to kill us. You, me, the baby. Everything that proves her powerless." George stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the glow of city lights. "Then let her try. We'll end this once and for all." The chance came sooner than expected. Claire Donovan called for a televised debate, her against George, with the state watching. It wasn't politics anymore. It was war. George accepted. The night of the debate tension strangled the air. Enya watched from backstage, Dave by her side as George faced Claire under the blinding lights of a live broadcast. Claire's smile was polished, her words venom-coated in sugar. "Governor," she purred, "you speak of integrity while harboring a scandal under your own roof. How can voters trust a man who can't control his own family?" Gasps echoed in the audience. Cameras swung toward George, then Dave, then Enya. George's gaze was steady. "Control," he repeated, voice calm but fierce. "Family is not about power. It's about love, responsibility, and truth. Enya Johnson has shown more courage in facing your cruelty than you have shown in your entire career." Applause broke out. Claire's smile faltered, and as for trust, George pressed his baritone unshakable. "I'd rather lose an election telling the truth than win one living a lie." The audience erupted. Claire tried to retort, but the momentum had shifted. And then Enya's world tilted. Backstage, a shadow moved. A hand clamped over her wrist. She was pulled into the corridor before she could scream. The hall was dim, the noise of the debate muffled. Enya struggled, heart pounding. A masked figure shoved her against the wall. "Message from the Donovans," the voice hissed. "Leave now, or next time it won't just be a warning." Her breath came in ragged gasps. Fear clawed at her, but something more substantial surged through her veins. Fire, not weakness. "You can threaten me," she whispered fiercely, "but you will never silence me." With a sudden shove, she broke free, stumbling back into the light. Guards rushed forward. Dave appeared seconds later, panic etched across his face. "Enya." He caught her, his arms enveloping her. His chest heaved, his voice raw. I thought I'd lost you." Her tears spilled freely, but her voice was steady. "You can't keep standing in the shadows, Dave. If you love me, if you love this child, stand in the light with me." His gaze locked with hers, the last of his hesitation shattering. "Then in the light is where I'll be, always." The final blow came not from George Enya, but from truth. Lisa, the former Donovan media employee, came forward with recordings. Claire's voice ordering the fabrication of photos, the threats, the lies. Played live on air, the tapes detonated like bombs. Claire's empire crumbled in hours. Allies fled. Reporters turned. Her perfect mask cracked under the weight of exposure. By dawn, she was no longer a queen. She was a villain. Months later, the Vasquez mansion no longer echoed with tension, but with laughter. The nursery smelled of fresh paint and baby powder. Enya rocked a tiny bundle in her arms, the baby's dark curls pressed against her chest. Dave knelt beside her, his finger caught in the little grip of their child's hand. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Enya said softly, tears shining in her eyes. George entered quietly, a smile breaking across his usually stern face. "The best legacy," he murmured, "isn't in politics. It's in the family." Enya looked around the room at the man who had once been her fiercest critic, now kneeling as a father, the governor who had chosen love over ambition, and the child who bound them all together. For the first time, she felt like an outsider. She felt at home. The wedding came in the spring. It wasn't the grand spectacle people expected. No chandeliers, no media circus. Just a garden blooming with roses, close friends, and the warmth of sunlight spilling over them. Enya walked down the aisle in an elegant, straightforward gown, her smile radiant. Dave waited at the altar, nerves and love tangled in his chest. When their vows were spoken, they weren't about politics or appearances or promises to the world. They were about morning's laughter, forgiveness, second chances, and choosing each other every day. And when Dave kissed her, it wasn't the kiss of a politician's son. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found his truth. Enya stood in the garden with Dave's arms around her as the celebration wound down that night. The stars burned bright overhead. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "what would have happened if I'd never walked into that party?" Dave kissed her temple. "Then I never would have found you. And I can't imagine a world without you." Her eyes closed, her heart full. They had chosen each other for all the battles, all the storms. And that, she knew, was the truest victory. This was not just a story of scandal and survival. It was a story of love, found in the unlikeliest places, strength born in fire, and choosing truth even when lies are easier. Enya and Dave's journey reminds us that family is not built by bloodlines alone, but by courage and commitment. That love is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand together despite it. That every ending is also a beginning. Share this story if you believe in second chances, love that fights through storms, and hope that refuses to die. Let it remind someone today that their own happy ending is still possible.